Well, today is a big day. Today, we finish up chapter 1 of Jonah. If you've been with us the last 4 weeks, today marks the 5th week through our series in Jonah. And if you've been paying attention, we've been slowly inching our way through the book, through chapter 1. Just looking at maybe 1 or 2 verses, slowly going. But today, we're actually going to almost double our text that we've covered so far. So, through the first 5 weeks, we've covered 10, but today we're going to cover 11 through 17. So it's going to be a little bit bigger than normal, but it's still going to be good. And so we've slowly been going through this introduction, the first chapter, because I believe this first section holds the most insight, the most application for our lives. So I really want to make sure we get as much as we can out of it. And so today, if you haven't already, go ahead and turn your Bibles there to Jonah chapter 1, verse 11. But we were talking this morning before service, after Sunday school. Debbie was saying how she read the scripture that we're going to cover today during the week. And I would encourage you to do that. I think that would just make it way better if you would just read just the several verses that we'll cover the next week. We'll just get your mind starting to churn and think of your questions, and then hopefully I can cover some of the things the next Sunday. So I would totally encourage you to do that if you would. But anyways, so the first chapter in Jonah, it gives us a look into who Jonah really is, what he cares about. And last week we talked about Jonah's identity and what he puts at the center of his life. And even though Jonah is a prophet, he's supposed to be a man of God, we found out that it's not exactly God that's at the center of his life. It's not God, it's actually his Hebrew heritage. It's his race. Now it's starting to make sense why Jonah didn't want to go preaching to Nineveh. It's starting to make sense why he decided to run away, why he went on the boat in the first place. Jonah doesn't believe that Nineveh deserves God's grace. They're awful people and they deserve to die. Some prophet. Are we even sure that he is a prophet? I mean, come on, he's literally doing everything wrong. He's doing the exact opposite of what a prophet should be. He's sleeping when he should be helping. He's avoiding the pagans, which he should be teaching to, preaching to. What is he doing? Well, this leads us to verse 11 of chapter 1. So today, let's finish up the introduction. Let's finish up chapter 1. Let's read verses 11 through 17. Start in verse 11. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried to the Lord, "Oh Lord, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, O Lord, have done as you pleased." Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. But the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So the sailors figure out that it's Jonah's fault that this storm has come upon them. It's his fault that they're in the worst storm that they've ever experienced in their life. And they need to try to figure out how they can get the storm to stop. So they asked Jonah what they should do to get the storm to stop. And what Jonah says here is shocking. "Pick me up and throw me into the sea." What? Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Kill me is essentially what he's saying. He says, throw me into the sea. You have to do it. But these sailors, man, I love these sailors. Even though Jonah says, just kill me, you just do it. They do everything in their power to try to avoid killing him. He doesn't deserve this kind of love. Do you remember last week they were picking lots? They all wrote their name on the sticks and they randomly picked, and they picked Jonah. And I'm sure some of them were pretty excited that that's who they pulled. Oh, that guy who's sleeping down in the hole, who's not helping at all, let's kill him. They could have immediately just killed him like that. As soon as they pulled the name, oh, it's his fault? He needs to die. But no, these sailors, they go, okay, let's be patient about this. Let's be rational. Let's go talk to him and try to figure this out. Instead of just killing him right off the bat. They try to understand him more. And even after he says, it's okay to kill me, just do it, they say, no, let's not do that. Let's try everything we can to not do that. And they try to row to shore, but they just can't do it. They can't do it. And it says in verse 13, the sea grew even wilder than before. They knew what they had to do. So why did Jonah say to them the only resolution was to throw him overboard? Why did he say that? It's kind of hard to tell Jonah's motivations here. It could be two things. Is he repenting? Is he finally realizing, man, I have done awful against the Lord. I've sinned. I deserve to die. The sin I have committed is irredeemable. I deserve to die. Is he repenting? Or is it the opposite? Is he saying, oh, I would rather die than follow God? There's no way that I'm ever going to follow God. I don't care anymore. Just kill me. Which one is it? Is it the first one or the second one? Well, I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle there. It's probably not either or. The first option, that Jonah is repenting, is probably unlikely because the entire story so far, Jonah's been completely avoiding God. He doesn't even pray to God whenever all the other pagans are worshiping their God. So to say that he's all of a sudden just going to repent like that, I don't think so. I don't think that's really what's happening. On the other hand, I don't think he wants to die and kill himself because, if he wanted to do that, he might as well just have done it in the first place instead of getting on the boat and trying to run away. So I don't think that's really it either. I think Jonah tells the sailors to throw him overboard, not because he's looking at God, but because he's looking at them. Not because he's looking at God, but he's looking at them. Look at verses 12 and 13. He says, it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. He says, the sea will become quiet for you. There's an emphasis on talking about the people, the sailors, you. He's realizing that this storm is affecting the sailors, who are fantastic people. He's starting to feel shame. He says, I don't want you to die because of me. This is my fault. You don't deserve to die, so let me do it. I think Jonah's finally starting to take responsibility for his actions. It took him long enough. The situation is finally hitting him. The sailors have outshined Jonah in every way. Even once they figured out that the storm was his fault, they could have just killed him. They tried to keep him alive. Jonah, like I said, he doesn't deserve that kind of love. He's a complete jerk. They decided to love him anyways. Jonah finally recognizes the sailor's incredible grace, and he just says, just throw me in already. I deserve it. Often the first step to coming to one's spiritual senses is when we finally start thinking about somebody, anybody, other than ourselves. We start thinking about others, before ourselves. Jonah says something like, you're dying for me, but I should be the one dying for you. I'm the one God is angry at. Jonah's pity towards the sailors brings about something pretty remarkable. It brings about this theme in the book of Jonah that's prominent. Jonah teaches us that the ultimate pattern of love is substitutionary. That word, substitution. Placing yourself in front of death so others don't have to. Jonah teaches us this. Substitution. Jonah's saying, I will fully take the wrath of the waves so you won't have to. True love meets the needs of the loved one no matter the cost to oneself. All life-changing love is some kind of substitutionary sacrifice. And this is absolutely true in every aspect of our lives. Just think about parenting for a second. I know most of you, if not all of you, have experienced parenting. Parenting is a huge sacrifice. You give birth to this little child and he doesn't know anything. And it's up to you to sacrifice your time and your effort and your love to make sure that they grow up to be the kind of person that they should be. You have to read to them. You have to speak to them in order for them to have some sort of grasp of this whole language thing. Because if you don't do a good job of that, they're going to be a failure. If they can't speak, that's huge. That's because of the parents, because of you. Huge amounts of sacrifice is important. Substitutionary. Substitutionary is in almost every movie ever created. You have the main character back up against the wall and there's a gun pointed at him. And and the best friend jumps in front of the bullet. The ultimate source of love is substitutionary, and that is all around us. It's easy to see. Substitutionary sacrifice is the ultimate source of love. I think we can all think of the ultimate example of this, the ultimate example of substitutionary sacrifice. Jesus dying on the cross for us. He did it so you didn't have to. So you don't have to bear the weight of your brokenness and your sin anymore. Jesus actually talked about our friend Jonah here. Jesus actually compared himself to Jonah, which seems kind of crazy because what we know about Jonah so far, he's nothing like Jesus. If Jesus is the only person to ever live a perfect life, Jonah's pretty far down at the bottom of the list. Well, actually, Jesus doesn't completely compare himself to Jonah, but he compares himself to what Jonah did. Matthew 12:40, Jesus says, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Jesus calls himself greater than Jonah. Jesus says, just as Jonah will be in the fish for 3 days, I will be dead for 3 days. And just as Jonah spit up by the whale, I too will resurrect. I will rise from the dead. He's comparing himself. If Jonah shows substitutionary love, Jesus shows the ultimate substitutionary love. Jesus summarizes his mission in Mark 10:45. He says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to sacrifice his life as a ransom for many." As a ransom. He came and gave his life. Substitution. Looking back at our text, look at verse 15. "Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm." The moment Jonah went under the water, the storm switched off just like that, like a light switch. It was crazy and chaotic, and then all of a sudden it was just glass. It was still and silent. The storm was an expression of the anger that God had towards his prophet, Jonah. The storm then subsided when he was thrown into the water. In the same way, Jesus' sacrifice did this for us. God was mad at us for our sin and our evil, but Jesus stood in our place and bore the punishment that we deserved. Many people today find the idea of an angry God to be distasteful. Although most modern people, I think, would agree that to be passionate about justice means that you should have a right amount of anger. I think to have a right amount of anger is appropriate. You should be somewhat angry that sex trafficking is still a thing. That should make you a little bit angry. And so to apply that same principle to God, I think fits. I think that works. But also, just as important as all of this is his wrath. God's wrath isn't something we like to talk about because it's weird, it's hard. We would rather talk about other attributes like his love, his grace, his faith, all these nice, warm, fuzzy things. But also something that we can't forget is his wrath, because after all, he is God, and he's all-powerful. To deny God's wrath diminishes the wonder and immensity of Jesus' sacrifice. Jonah in our story is only being punished for his sin, but Jesus for all of humanity's sin. For all of us, so we didn't have to. In the end, we see that Jonah's problem is just like ours. We have a false idea that if we fully submit to God, he doesn't really have our best interest in mind. We don't trust him. And this is ultimately why Jonah doesn't go to Nineveh, because he doesn't trust God. He doesn't trust that he has his best interest in mind. But here is the ultimate proof for why you can trust God. Listen to this. A God who substitutes himself for us and suffers so that we may go free is a God that you can trust. A God who substitutes himself and sacrifices himself so we can go free is a God that you can trust. And it's because of that you can trust him. Jonah mistrusted God, but he didn't have the cross. He didn't know who Jesus was. This was 2,000 years before all of that. He didn't know about any of that. But we do. So what's our excuse? Look looking at the last 2 verses of chapter 1, something incredible happens. Look at verse 16. At this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord. They made vows to him. All the things that just took place had a huge impact on the sailors. When the sea grows perfectly calm, they are seized with a great fear. It says fear. But this is a new kind of fear. They were afraid before whenever the storm was raging and it was chaotic. They were struck with a fear, but that's a different kind of fear. This is a different word for fear. This is a fear of the Lord. A fear of the Lord struck them. In verse 16, the sailors used the covenantal name for God, Yahweh. Yahweh. Yahweh is the Hebrew personal name that denotes a personal, saving relationship. The sailors immediately begin to offer oaths and sacrifices to the Lord. Jonah predicted that once he was thrown into the water, that the storm would stop, it would cease. And when that actually happened, when they saw that that prediction actually came true, they were astounded. Oh my gosh, what did we just do? Holy cow. That's crazy. They believed. Most of the times when we see pagans interact with God, they make sacrifices to him in the midst of chaos and suffering to try to get the suffering to stop. They worship God simply just for what they can get out of it, essentially. But this is different here. The sailors worship God after the fact. They bow down and worship him after the storm stopped. And they're saved. This means that the sailors are worshiping God not for what they can get out of it, but simply just for how amazing he is. And that is the beginning of true faith. Worshiping God not for what you can get out of it, but simply just for how amazing God is. Coming to the end of chapter 1, all of this is so ironic. Jonah was fleeing God because he did not want to go and share God's truth to wicked pagans, but that's exactly what he ends up doing. Jonah's awful attitude and sin actually ends up converting several pagans. Several non-Christians actually start to believe in God because of Jonah. He hasn't done anything. He was asleep. He didn't help at all. He even said, just kill me. And they believed. That's astounding. I can't believe that someone like Jonah could actually be successful at converting people. That doesn't even make any sense. So, I think this teaches us something very important. I think this teaches us that our role in conversion is not us. We're just vessels that carry the message of the Holy Spirit. It is not us actually doing the work whenever we're talking to people that don't believe, whenever we're talking to non-Christians. It's not us doing the work. We're just the vessel. It's the Spirit doing the work. And this is evident here. Jonah hasn't done squat. And yet these pagans believe. That's amazing. There's a professor at Ozark, and his name's Mike Ackerman. And he's mentored me for the past 2 years, and he's amazing. But he used to live in Japan. He used to be a church planter in Japan. And he went out there, and Japan is extremely unreached. I know I've probably talked to some of you about my passion for Japan. I went over there last year, and it was amazing. Japan is less than 1% Christian. Out of the 137 million people that live there, 1% of them know who Jesus is. 1%. That's a problem. And so part of the reason why I want to go over there is so I can help plant churches so more people can hear about it. But Mike was a part of that same organization that I run with, and he actually started it. He founded it. He went and he planted this church, the first church of this organization in Nagoya, Japan. And Mike shared with me plenty of stories from whenever he was in Japan. One of my favorites is of a brother and a sister who came to Christ through their church. The sister started coming, and she originally just started coming just because she was interested in the language. She just wanted to talk to these white people because they were Americans and they knew English, and she wanted to learn. But after sitting through the sermons and the messages for a couple months, it started to resonate with her. And after a couple months, she decided to make the decision to follow Christ with her life. And then soon after that, she invited her brother to come with her. And he was a little confused at first, not sure what he thought about it. But him too, just after a couple months, decided to give his life for Christ. And they were both baptized together. Well, the thing about Japan that is hard to understand sometimes is that they're a collectivist culture. So here in America, we're very individualistic. So we think that our decisions only impact ourselves. But in Japan, they're very collectivist. So your decision impacts everyone around you, but especially your family. Your family is huge in a collectivist culture. And so by this brother and sister converting to Christianity, man, it was like they just slapped their family across the face and said, never mind, we don't want you. Because we want this new religion that we just found. And so because of this, the brother and sister had to face the anger of their father. The horrible anger of their father. Their father could not believe that they would disrespect the family like that. See, Japan is predominantly Buddhist and Shinto religion, and specifically focuses on ancestors and honoring the ancestors, those that have come before you. And so by the brother and the sister claiming Christianity and going against everything that their family believed, they were just completely disrespecting them. And the father was furious. He was livid. The brother and the sister would go to Mike and tell him horrific stories of things that he would do to them. He would pull her hair across the room, dragging her. In one instance, he took their TV and threw it out the window. He would beat them. And they just came to him and said, Mike, what do we do? I don't know what to do. So Mike told him the only thing that he knew what to say. He said, pray. He told him to pray. And so for 15 years, that brother and sister prayed that their father would forgive them, and that he would accept God into his heart. For 15 years. Well, Mike ended up leaving Japan after a couple of years and ended up coming back to Joplin to teach at Ozark. But he was given the opportunity to go back and visit just a couple of years ago. And he went back to the church and never guessed who he saw when he went and visited the church. Never guessed. It was the father. He was a door greeter at the church. For 15 years, that brother and sister prayed that their father would forgive them. For 15 years, they prayed that he would accept Jesus into his life. 15 years, they endured the beating after beating, the suffering after suffering. For 15 long years, the father finally came around. And he said, I forgive you. And you know what? I'm sorry for all the things that I did to you. But he didn't just stop there. He didn't just say, I'm sorry. He went a step further, and he went to church with them. He said, you know what? I want to try to figure out what this whole thing is about. And so he went to church. And after a couple months, he made the same decision that brother and sister made. And that brother and sister got to baptize their father, who was beating them senselessly for 15 years. But because they prayed, and they prayed, and they prayed, he came around. How do you explain that? I can't explain that. That's the power of something way beyond us. That's the power of something way, way stronger than anything we could ever do. That's the power of the Spirit, who's ultimately doing all the hard work. It's not us. It's the Spirit. There's only one thing that has the power to do something like that, and that's the power of the cross. It's the power of that sacrifice that Jesus made for you, that substitution that Jesus made for you. Sometimes I think we can have a hard time grasping really how big that debt was that he paid for us. Lloyd Jones actually talks about this in his book. He says, imagine a friend came to me. He said, hey, I was over at your house the other day, and I paid a bill for you. Lloyd Jones says, I don't know how to answer. How do I know how to respond to that? He says, well, I don't know how to respond. He says, the only way I know how to respond is this. I know how much that debt cost. Was it just 20 cents, just a mere postage stamp? Well, I guess I'd say thanks. But what if the IRS finally caught you? What if all the back taxes finally caught up to you and you're stuck? He says, the only way I know how to respond is if I know how much that debt cost. If I know how much that debt cost, it tells me whether to shake his hand or to fall down on the ground and kiss his feet. Jesus paid an insurmountable debt, a huge debt for you. That has the power for us to fall on our knees and kiss his feet. That is the power that converts people, the people that accept the Spirit into their hearts. It is that substitutionary sacrifice that has the power to do that kind of stuff. It's because of that substitutionary sacrifice that you can trust God. You can trust that he has your best interest. It's because of that sacrifice you can go all in with your life. And you can take a beating for 15 years. All because of the cross. All because of that substitutionary sacrifice. Let's pray. God, thank you for your sacrifice for us. Thank you for coming down and submitting yourself, humbling yourself, and becoming a servant, to becoming mere flesh, a mere human, one of us, and spreading your love to us. God, I pray that everyone in this room would just take in the message of the cross and really understand it for its immensity, for really how big it is huge. Thank you for the power of your sacrifice. Thank you that because of that, we can withstand anything. God, I pray that we would become fools for the gospel. That even though others may not believe that you rose from the dead, that may seem like foolishness to them, that we would wholeheartedly believe it. We are eternally indebted to you. Help us to love you more.